Okay, it does look like it's 10 o'clock, and I'll confirm it is live. Okay. Welcome to the Audit and Governance Committee. On Monday, 22nd of February, I shall be chairing the meeting. Matt is there, but he's having some building work, as you noticed. So the normal procedures will be, obviously, if you can put your request to speak RTS in the chat bar and reserve it just for that, or for points of order, that would be very helpful, and we'll endeavour to catch anyone who wants to speak. Certainly, and welcome members of the public and officers and councillors to this meeting. So the first item on the agenda, I'll just scroll up, is apologies for absence. I'm aware of Councillor Janet Dover. Are there any others, Susan?
No other apologies at the moment that I'm aware of, Councillor Biggs.
Okay, we'll now move to item 2, which is the minutes of the previous meeting. Just to confirm for accuracy, I'm not aware of any problems with those minutes. Are we all happy to accept those minutes? If I don't hear anything else, I shall assume that we're content with those minutes. Okay, thank you. Right. Next item on the agenda is, okay, it's the quarter 3 management report, which is item 6. We have no items that members of the public have brought forward, have we?
No, Chairman. Can we just go back to declarations of interest, please?
Sorry, yeah. Any declarations of interest to declare? I'll take that as a no. Councillor Pipe has asked if we're doing any introductions. We don't normally, but I'm happy to go around the room, but I think people are aware of who the councillors are from the agenda. Unless anyone has a strong wish to do that, I don't intend to go around introducing every councillor at every meeting. We wouldn't do that normally. Okay, so we'll now go on to item 6, which is the quarter 3 financial report, and move to presume the director to introduce this, please. Aidan Dunn.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just looking at the agenda, item 5, we've got the update on the accounts from our external auditor, and I'm conscious that Ian Howes is waiting in the wings. Would it be possible to do that item first?
It certainly would, yeah. I'm just looking at my bookmarks on Modcard. It goes straight to 6.
Okay.
This is out 5, that's why, so apologies there.
Fine. If I start on item 5, then if that's okay with you, Chair, thank you. So this item is an update from last time, where we're looking at the completion of the final accounts for 2019-2020. So members will remember that we looked at these previously, the accounts, and have delegated authority to the chair and to myself to sign off the accounts once the external audit has been completed. At the last meeting, our external auditor Ian Howes from Deloitte joined us and gave us an update of some of the issues that meant that the external audit hadn't been completed at that point, and his team and my team have been working extraordinarily hard ever since to try and reach a point of closure. One particular issue that is emerging, or has emerged over recent weeks, is the valuation of fixed assets. So we haven't reached the point where the audit has been concluded yet, but I was wondering if I could at this point invite Ian in, perhaps we could introduce himself and then give us an update from his perspective, please.
Over to you, Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. I think most of you know me, but I'm the external audit partner from Deloitte, responsible for delivering the external audit. As Aidan says, we've been working very closely with his team on the accounts. Unfortunately, these things have a habit of, you think you're nearly there, and then something comes up in a question, or the way in which a question is answered gives rise to some further questions, and that's the case certainly with the fixed assets and evaluation. Unfortunately, the team are hampered by the fact that the people who prepared the working papers that underpin the accounts are no longer with the authority, and therefore we can't ask questions of the people who prepared them, and that is causing a bit of a delay in just understanding exactly how the valuers' numbers have been translated into the numbers that are in the accounts. We're working through that together, and once we've done that, that will allow us to consider the outcome of that on the accounts, and therefore move us towards final signing. It's very difficult to put an exact timeline on that. All I can assure members is that we are working very hard together to make it as quickly as possible. We're all conscious of the fact that we need to start the next audit, and indeed planning work is already underway for the next audit alongside trying to complete the previous one. So we're trying not to allow it to impact on the next audit as we finalise the 1920 audit. But I'm happy to take your questions or any detail that you may wish on that, members.
Thank you very much, Ian. I'm not seeing any questions coming up. Obviously, I think members are concerned that this has dragged on for some time. And every meeting we hope to see that finalised. So there's a little bit of concern, I think. Obviously, as you say, we're about to start the next one. But obviously you're giving your explanations. So we just hope by the time of the next meeting that we'll be in a better position. Okay, Ian, you wish to respond?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just one point to point out, nothing that we've seen to date has any impact on the level of council tax that needs to be raised. So the numbers that we're creating are the ones in the balance sheet, and therefore I just wanted to reassure members on that point, which I think is really important, that it doesn't impact on council tax raising or the budget that you might be setting at the moment. Okay,
that's reassuring, I think. Okay, so that's the verbal update. So I'll now move on to where I was originally, which was item 6, which is the quarter-3 report, and again over to Aidan Dunn, Financial Director, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I should introduce myself. Aidan Dunn, Exec Director for Corporate Development and the Council Section 1.
You're very quiet there, Aidan.
There we go. Sorry, forgive me. Yes, if I could just apologise for not introducing myself earlier. Aidan Dunn, Executive Director for Corporate Development and the Council's Section 151 Officer. So the report you have in front of you is the Quarter-3 financial report looking at capital and revenue. This report was presented to Cabinet on the 19th of January, and it covers expenditure for the period April through to December 2020 and our forecasts based on that information for the full year. At the time of that report, we were predicting or forecasting an overspend at the year end of £18.6 million. That was an improvement, or is an improvement, since what we were forecasting at Quarter-2, but clearly is worrying, and we have a significant way to go. Of course, the key factors we've been reporting throughout the year is that of COVID, and COVID has had really significant impact on our income levels, on our expenditure levels, and our ability to focus on the pre-agreed or the budgeted transformation savings as well. And I
think Aidan's frozen there.
Am I back? Sorry, am I back on there? Sorry. Yes, yeah, sorry. So like the rest of local government and like the country as a whole, we've been impacted significantly through COVID, and the government has provided additional funding throughout the COVID time to support the council and to support the local economy. From Dorset Council's perspective, this money has been really, really welcome, but it's not enough to cover our financial shortfall. The biggest variable we're predicting, and the report highlights this, is around council tax and business rates. And part of our predicted shortfall is about 13 million, a combination of 10 million of council tax and 3 million of business rates. Essentially, collection rates are both down. But that's not to say that that's sort of down, never to be recovered. Part of the analysis we're doing at the moment, and indeed part of the process, is to wait to the year end, because people may have delayed their payments at the beginning of the year, seeing how the year went. So we may collect additional money during the last part, the final month, versus the impact on the economy and whether people are able to pay at all. So there is a degree of uncertainty at the moment. So the position may improve from that 18.6 million. That might be through additional government funding. One of the key factors will be the cost of care, and in particular, since this report, we published this report, it's been a really, really challenging time for the social care sector, the adult care sector, working closely with health colleagues to provide sufficient capacity to discharge people from hospital, and that has had a financial impact. So that's going to be a key factor. And finally, whether the collection fund catches up on our funding. So the report describes that position. It explains how the position remains underpinned by our reserves, which is fortunate, but of course those reserves can only be used once. And then the report concludes with a nod to next financial year. And you'll remember that the last week the full council approved the budget for next financial year. That's sort of a welcome step in terms of our forward planning. So those are my comments by way of introduction. I'm conscious we've got colleagues from directorates on hand to answer questions. If the committee is interested, I'd like to come back and say a little bit more about the grant funding that we've received from COVID for COVID. I can say more about that, but I'll hand back to you in the first instance, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks very much. We've got a number of requests to speak. First is Councillor Mike Parks, and then Councillor Claire Sutton. So over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Chairman. It's just really following up on what Aidan was saying about the collections and the missed collections and revenue. Appreciate what you're saying to wait till the end of the year, and I totally get those points you're making. But what are we actually going to do, sort of actively, to recover that money post the end of the financial year? If we're talking some significant amounts of money here.
Thank you. Yeah, very good question, and you're right. There's a degree of uncertainty. Are people going to pay in the latter 2 months of the year? And one of the things that we'll have to do as a finance team is make that judgment about how much of that debt will be unrecoverable because people just can't pay, on how much of it will be recoverable, but it's a timing issue into the next financial year, even though we account for it in this current financial year. At the moment, we are not actively pursuing outstanding debts in that regard. We don't feel it'd be appropriate to be heavy-handed given the context of where we are in COVID. But as we look towards an unlock and things becoming pursue debts, but as with all our debt policy, we look at the circumstances of individuals. So we're certainly not going to be just writing it off to COVID as a bad experience. We'll be following our usual debt recovery processes, but we need to move beyond this COVID period before we do so.
Thank you very much. Does that answer your points, Mike?
Could I just come back, if I may, Chairman? In terms of percentages of usual, I guess usual times, what would be the percentage of non-payers, and what do you estimate this to be sort of for this year?
Thank you. I think we've written a bit about that in the report, so I'll just make sure I'm quoting the same figures. Bear with me 2 seconds. So I think, sorry, bear with me. So I can't quite find the figures to hand at the moment, but the So we are. We are. Can I come back on that question, because I want to be accurate on that. We'll be able to do it during the course of the meeting. And in fact, if I could ask one of my finance colleagues who's listening in, if they could look into that, and we'll put the come back with a response shortly, if that's okay, Chair.
I think that's fine. Give you a bit of chance to find that. So in that case, we'll go over to Councillor Claire Sutton and then to Matt Hall. Councillor Matt Hall, thank you.
Thanks, Richard. I've got a couple of comments and then 3 questions. So shall I, as usual, do those one at a time?
Yes, please.
That's great. Thank you. I mean, obviously, it feels like this has been somewhat superseded by the budget, but nevertheless, you know, we still need to ensure that we're scrutinising diligently. Just a comment first of all on the COVID figures. It's a point I've made before, but it's really helpful to have those stripped out as much as anything else, because it helps us to articulate to our wider public, you know, to our residents, you know, just what kind of circumstances we're operating under. So that's really helpful. Sorry, I can hear quite a lot of background noise.
Yeah, I don't know who that is.
Okay.
Let's take your name first.
I think Bill Pipe, yeah. Okay, my first question is page 19, where we see there's two new care packages of 0.85 and 0.86 million each, which, you know, just tells us such a story in itself, doesn't it, in terms of how difficult it is to predict demand. But in spite of those 2 packages, there's only a net increase of 0.28 million within that budget, which is very commendable. But I suppose that behind that lies a worry, doesn't it, that the impact on all the other smaller packages. So I suppose I'd be seeking some reassurance from adults as opposed to you, Aidan, about the impact of managing those very large packages and the impact that has on the smaller packages, if that question makes sense.
Yes, certainly. I think, do we have a director available?
Hopefully, Tony Meadows, are you available? Are you able to comment?
Yes, Tony. Over to you, Tony Meadows.
Good morning, everybody. Sorry, I've just realised I put my camera on and I've got an inappropriate backdrop, but it does feel like that sometimes. The situation in terms of adults, obviously, there is a significant difference between some of the large packages that we see coming through, because what we are actually looking at there is some quite significant needs of an individual, where they're, you know, potentially dealing with severe learning disability and other health conditions as well. And a lot of that is really relating to the amount of care that's put in. I think in terms of reassurance on those, in reality, I think when we're looking at some of those cases, what we have to ensure is that the council is, shall we say, funding the correct elements of the care, and to ensure that where there are health elements that require funding, that obviously health partners are working with us and sharing those risks and responsibilities. That is something that we have been working on and I'll continue to work on. So that's very much about ensuring that we are negotiating those responsibilities and resetting some of those areas. One of the areas that has been previously of concern was some of those areas of health joint funding. We have sort of formally been working with the clinical commissioning group and actually stated that, you know, we will not be continuing with some of the, shall we say, historic arrangements that were less balanced, and are working on that at this moment to address those concerns. I think, Councillor Sutton, to pick on your point on the smaller packages, I think one of the issues that we do have to be cognizant of is that there is a lot of additional funding through grants, etc., that is going into the sector to support PPE, infection control, workforce, all of these sorts of things, which obviously those do have a shelf life. And I suppose some of the concern is that government funding, when it does cease, could actually present a little bit of a problem from that point of view. What we are doing, though, is again trying to look at how we're working differently. It was previously part of our transformation plan, to actually look at a more strength-based approach and making sure that we're utilising all other areas of support that we can. And I think this has been brought forward a little bit, unlike some areas of transformation which have paused because of COVID. One of the focuses around Home First and the way that we support people being discharged from hospital, and actually making sure people go to their own home first, if it's able to be done, and supported to actually rehabilitate, re-able them, etc., to the best level they can be. That work has sort of taken a bit of an acceleration recently. So we're working with the local government association. We have Professor John Bolton, who's coming in to actually support the whole system, not just Dorset Council, in how we adopt some really good practice and how we can really escalate that work. And that's taking place at the moment. So we would hope that that is going to have an impact on some of those smaller packages. But again, we've also got to be cognizant that the sector is under huge pressure, and that is also in terms of its viability. And we all see from a day-to-day point of view how care is impacted. So we are aware of that. We are working with the providers very, very in a very detailed way to understand the pressures and to work through a solution. But I think some of this isn't just around the price of care. Some of this is making sure it's the right care in the right place and those risks are shared.
Thank you. Does that answer your points there, Claire?
Yeah, it does. It does. That's really helpful and really reassuring, actually. Thank you, Tony. And moving on to children's on page 20. This is 11.14. The 200,000 savings on staff restructuring, which is assumed in the budget. I wanted to get an idea of the degree of confidence we have about achieving that, and obviously one wants to understand the impact that belongs in a different committee other than this one. So yes, the degree of confidence we have of achieving that 200,000 saving.
Thank you. Do we have anyone from Children's Services on the call? Doesn't look like it. Is that something, Aidan, we can get Teresa to respond, or see if she's available later?
Yes, if that's okay, we'll come back to you. I think just on a general point of the restructurings, we go through a very sort of methodical, planned basis, and the blueprint for change has sort of now concluded, and the new staffing arrangements are put in place. So but we can come back with a bit of detail on that specifically.
Thank you. I'll go over to Councillor Matt Hall.
I've got one
Sorry,
more.
another point, haven't you? Sorry. Back to you, Claire. Sorry.
This is one of my scratched record ones. It's the dedicated schools grant, the high needs block. So I understand from the text that we have to retain the 21.8 million from last year as a negative reserve. So my question on that is, so when we're looking at the budget, there's two questions actually. So when we're looking at the budget, we look at the reserve figure, in our heads, we know that reserve figure is actually 22 million larger than it looks. So that's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is the predicted, I think in one paper it says 16 million, another it says 18 million for this year. Will that appear on the accounts in the same way? And my third question, and I think I know the answer to this, is, as you know, I'm perennially worried that at some point the Department for Education is going to go to our schools and say, we want our money back, to put it very, very bluntly. And it looks like and sounds like we don't have any control about that. And again, it's not a question for you, Aidan. Well, actually probably is. What lengths are we going to lobby central government or the DfE to say our schools cannot afford to effectively repay this money? Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. So stop me if I make this overly complicated, because I'll try not to. So up until 2018-19, any overspend on the dedicated schools grant, in particular the high needs block, was the accounting responsibility of Dorset Council or Dorset County Council predecessor. Last year, the law was changed. A statutory instrument was published that had this by the Department for Education, that had this line in that said local authorities must not use their general funding to pay for education policy. So it's drawing a real distinction between education funding nationally, local taxpayer funding locally. And so that presented a problem nationwide, that you've kind of got these built up debts, but you can't treat how do you account for them? So there was a technical accounting adjustment, which basically said describe this as a negative reserve. So it doesn't impact on our books for last financial year, so the 1920, but this statutory instrument is time limited. So for last financial year, it's not an issue for Dorset Council. For this current financial year, it's not an issue for Dorset Council. And then for next financial year, it's not an issue for Dorset Council. So it's a 3-year ring fence saying not an issue. What we don't know is what happens beyond then. And so marked in my diary is April 2023, which is when the uncertainty lies. And who knows what might happen. And it could be the statutory instrument might be extended, or the government might write off the debt, who knows. But one of the scenarios you just described is that debt comes back to Dorset Council. And not only the historic debt you've just described, but also our current forecast for this financial year is a further 16 million. So it does present us with quite a significant financial challenge. And not just us, but across the country as well. And it's a really hot topic. And if you sort of read sort of the Municipal Journal or any of the trade press, as it were, this is a really, really hot topic. So there is a concern about if that debt were to return to Dorset Council, how would we fund it, and what would be the impact on the council and indeed the local education system. So it's such a topic that and it's not for me to say other than I'm very aware that our leader, Spencer Flower, is talking to local MPs, and I was involved with a call with him on Friday when he was giving them a briefing on this scenario. So when you're saying, when your question is what are we doing to influence policy, is certainly using our local MPs to explain the situation and the scenario for Dorset Council, but also there's national discussions going on as well. So I think it's an issue of significant financial concern to Dorset Council. The political avenues are being, but political levers are trying to be pushed to address it, and it's April 23 that is a real concern to me, and I think to us. Okay.
That's a very interesting technical question there that you raised, Claire. I'm sure the committee will be keeping a close eye on that and would like to be kept informed if there are any developments. Does that satisfy you?
Yeah, that's the clearest explanation I think I've had to date, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, it's an interesting one. Over to Councillor Matt Hall, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and apologies for any background noise. Aidan, I just want to ask you a couple of questions. The first one is to tease out more about this DSG, because the information that I've read does seem to suggest that that will come back to, in our case, Dorset Council in April 23. And I'm trying, and I don't know if you can help to understand the logic of why it is our problem, then changes the rule so that it isn't our problem, and then it looks like it will be our problem again. I'm trying to understand the logic. The second question is, throughout this paper, there are references to savings plans not being made. It would be very helpful to know whether that is the savings plan in its entirety, or actually whether any proportions of those savings have actually been made. And the third question is that there is in 13.3 a reference to the contingency fund. Can you just answer, please, how much of the contingency fund is left? Thank you.
Okay, Aidan, are you able to answer that?
I will do, and if I could just ask my colleague Heather to do a quick look up for that third question in the background, and we'll come back to that one. The first, your first question, Councillor Hall, about the logic of putting the pressure on local government, then taking off again, and then on again. I think this it comes back to the national policy for special educational needs, where the Department for Education has implemented a policy. Some local authorities have been able to do it within their within the allocated resources. Dorset Council hasn't been able to implement that policy within the funding available. What we're seeing is that a number of rural county councils and unitary authorities have been unable to live within their means. So, whilst I describe it as a problem across the country, not every local authority is struggling, and I think that's the but there's common circumstances for those that are struggling, as I say, rural, large geographical area, and those sort of issues. I think from the Department for Education's perspective, they're seeing that if some authorities can live within their funding and other authorities can't, then why is this a problem? And we've been doing a lot of work with them over the last couple of months to try and understand the unique Dorset situation. I can't explain why the DFE would want to take the responsibility away from us for 3 years and then only to give it back, unless something happens within that 3 years to correct the problem. And I think that's the heart of the conversations we're having with MPs and with the Department for Education. If you're okay, if I move on to the second question around the savings that have been planned but not necessarily achieved. This is a bit of a mixed bag. And in particular, at the beginning of the financial year, it was about transformation, and we'd set ambitions for 6 million of savings for transformation at the beginning of this financial year. And once the pandemic struck very early on, we sort of railed back our ambition, because basically we rediverted people that were involved with those transformations to get involved with frontline activities, be it PPE or anything else that was required. That said, we have been able to make some of the savings. So a really good example is that on our staff travel budget. Our ambition had been, in a non-pandemic time, was to use technology more, to do more remote work and spend less on travel. It's save the money and also contribute or reducing the carbon footprint. And clearly, having moved to this remote way of working for the last year, then those savings have been achieved, and more so. So whilst we haven't been able to achieve all of the savings, some of them have, and I'll just use that as an example. I think what's really important for me in the context of next financial year is the budget that was approved by members last week. In the supporting narrative that I wrote, I described this as a really challenging budget, and it's not a sort of sit back and it'll happen. We've got to actively manage this budget. There's significant tactical savings as well as transformational savings as well, and so we we're kind of having sort of weathered the real storm, I think, of COVID. We really are focusing now on those, trying to achieve those savings for next financial year, and we've already made a good start. If I could make that comment. And then finally, in terms of contingency, we've got a balance of 2.4 million left on the contingency now, and that'll be used, or it may be used over the last sort of 6 weeks of this financial year if there are any sort of unforeseen pressures. Otherwise, then it could be used to help offset the deficit on a one-off basis. Is that okay? I can bring my colleague Heather in if you want a bit more detail on that, Councillor Hall.
Answer your points, Matt?
It does. I would just find it useful for us going ahead with regards to your second answer, that when we look into the next financial year, it'd be useful to know, it might just be me, but it'd be useful to know what savings are being made, whether they're the old savings from this year or new highlighted savings, because I'm quite interested to know the facts behind the figures, so that we're making sure that we do make the best of the savings that we can do. Would that be possible?
Yeah, that'd be very helpful. The budget papers from last week, in appendices, I think it was 2, there was savings by directorate listing each type of saving, and we can provide sort of a running report on progress against those. Some of the savings we had intended to make this year but weren't able to, we've moved into next financial year, and they'll be incorporated in that long schedule, if that helps.
Yes, it would. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think Councillor Sutton picked up a good point earlier, which was about differentiating between the sort of COVID costs and the non-COVID costs and the increases in demand, and I think that's quite hard to differentiate. My only observation, I suppose, is, you know, I think that's highlighted on children's, that again we've got a demand led just by 10 increase of external places has caused the bulk of the increase, some 5.937 million. You know, it just seems to be an ongoing pattern that whatever we put in, is this demand just seems to come at us. I don't know, this is not the place for it, but it is just concern. You know, it's not just COVID, it is still trying to forecast our budgets, which is an ongoing issue. But no doubt we will continue to see that and test directors and members alike, really. I'm not seeing any further questions in the chat bar. Any request speaks? Sorry, Aidan.
If I could just come back. Yeah, I've drilled into our Power BI system, which is our intelligence information. So the question around what proportion of council tax and business rates had we collected from earlier. So for business rates, we've collected at this by the end of January, we'd collected 83.07% of what we'd expect to collect by the end of January. And similarly for council tax, we'd collected 92.15%, so 92.15. Both of those are figures at the end of January, and I kind of come back to my earlier comment. Traditionally, for example, council tax, we collect over the first 10 months of the year. We spread it over 10 months rather than 12, but we're conscious that a number of people have moved that from to collect over the last 10 months of the year. So actually, we'll be collecting money in February and March that we wouldn't normally do. So that'll kind of potentially distort our figures. But hopefully those figures will answer Councillor Park's question. Chair, could you indulge me for 1 minute just on government grants, the additional COVID funding that we've received? Because the quarter 3 cabinet report. Oh, sorry.
Could I just respond to Aidan there, please, before he moves on?
Councillor Parks, yes, please do.
Sorry to butt in like that. I think, Aidan, sorry, the question I was asking was, what is our usual percentage of unrecoverable council tax and business rates, and what did we estimate that we would be in comparison for this year in terms of percentages?
Thank you.
My mistake, sorry for misunderstanding that. Can we come back with a written response on that one to all committee, if that's okay? It's not figures I've got straight to hand, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's totally acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you. So just on business grants for 2 minutes for a second. Well, not just business grants, but additional government funding. The report at quarter 3 has got a section about all the different sorts of government funding that we've received. And latest funding, we've received 39 separate new grants from government. This was our Friday stock take. So we've received now £291 million of COVID funding as an authority from government. And that compares to our net budget, our usual net budget of 295 million. So in a way, we're almost at the point where our turnover for this financial year, our income for this financial year has almost doubled. So that funding is coming from various different government departments, be it the business department or Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, Department for Health, Department for Education. The bulk of the funding has been to support the local economy. So we've received about 228 million from various grant streams to push out to local businesses to support them during the various lockdowns. But you'll have seen from the report that we've got funding for school transport, for public transport, for testing, and all sorts of different activities. The reason I wanted to draw this to the committee's attention is, first of all, this is sort of a doubling of size, and therefore there's a doubling of effort in terms of, I think that, it's a recognition that the government is passing the funding that we're trying to spend and pass on as wisely as possible. But that scale of activity going through means, there's the increase in volume of transactions. Each of those government grants has detailed monitoring. Some of it is weekly, some of it is monthly as well. And so that's all going through. And I just wanted to give that sense of reassurance to the committee that as much as our workload in that regard has doubled, the team have risen to the challenge. We've got very much monitoring how we spend. We've got internal audit colleagues are involved in just checking out how that money is being spent effectively as well. Because we're conscious that if you double, if you grow, any business grows too quickly, there's a risk of losing control. And I wanted to reassure the committee that actually we're really on it, and it's been tough and challenging. And in a way, this has been how the heart of what the council has been doing is using this money as effectively as possible to support residents and to support the local economy. So I'll hand back to you at that point, Chair.
Thank you. I think that's really assuring, and I think we'd like to pass on our thanks to the team for their hard work. I think members also, will be aware of the sort of risks of fraud and false claims, etc. And I think that's something that we would like to keep a close eye on. But I'm sure you're on top of that. Okay. Right, we've got a question from Bill Pite. Is this meeting still going out live? Is some concerns? Is that correct, Susan?
Chairman, I'll just check that with you now on another device.
It does say on mine, Chairman, that it's pre-live.
It says live on mine, but
okay. Mike says live as well. It must be my...
Chairman, I can confirm the meeting is going live. It is being broadcast.
Okay.
Computer lies.
Okay, with that, we now move on to agenda item 7, which is the suggested code of conduct. Which I'm sure you've all had a chance to read. So it's the LGA contract, and I believe Jonathan Mayer, you wish to take us through this report.
Yes, good morning, Chairman. I'll just introduce myself first. I'm Jonathan Mayer. I'm the Corporate Director for Legal and Democratic, and I'm also the Council's Monitoring Officer. So in presenting this report, I'm going to take as my starting point the Localism Act 2011, because Section 27 of that Act imposes a duty on the Council to promote and maintain high standards of conduct amongst its members and its co-opted members. So a duty on the Council to promote and maintain high standards of conduct. And the Council has given this committee, the Audit and Governance Committee, the lead responsibility for promoting, for that duty to promote and maintain high standards of conduct. How do you promote and maintain high standards of conduct? The Localism Act tells you that in particular, you must do that by adopting a code of conduct dealing with the conduct that is expected of councillors when you're acting in that capacity, when you're acting as councillors. And the Act also tells us that your code of conduct has to be consistent with what are called the 7 principles of conduct in public life: selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty, and leadership. And provided your code is consistent with those principles, then you're free to adopt your own code of conduct, and it doesn't have to be the same as everyone else's. The other main requirement in the Localism Act then is that in addition to having a code of conduct, then a relevant authority other than a parish council must have in place arrangements under which allegations that a councillor has breached the code of conduct, you must have in place arrangements for the investigation of those allegations and arrangements under which those allegations can then be heard. So this report then picks up 2 main areas. One, the adoption of a proposed adoption of a replacement code of conduct, and secondly, the adoption of proposed replacement arrangements for assessing, investigating, and hearing complaints against councillors. And on the first of those points, on the adoption of a code of conduct then, for some time, the Local Government Association have been working on behalf of the sector on a new code of conduct. And that code of conduct is appended to your report. There's a link to it. And I've drawn out in the covering report what I think are the main points from that new code of conduct. I'm happy to answer questions about the LGA model code, but 2 points in particular. One I think is really helpful is that the code is very clear about the circumstances in which it applies to councillors. And my experience of dealing with people who wanted to make complaints about councillors is that it's not always clear when the current code applies. This is particularly clear about when the code of conduct applies to someone. The second point that I wanted to draw out in particular is that this code of conduct does widen the interests that you would be expected to register, to make public, if you were to adopt this code. So it describes something called other registerable interests that you would be expected to include in your declaration of interests and have available for members of the public to see. And I can answer questions about those if you need me to. At present, Dorset Council has adopted only the requirement to disclose the legal minimum, which are called disclosable pecuniary interests. So that's the first part, adoption of a code of conduct. The second part, the arrangements under which you assess, you investigate, and you hear complaints. Again, I won't go through them line by line. I'm happy to answer questions about the arrangements. I will say, though, the changes proposed, again, are based on experience. We've been at council for almost 2 years now. And the sorts of arrangements that I'm recommending to you this morning are, I think, the ones that you would perhaps see in a more mature authority, that is an authority that's been operating for a bit longer than we have. And in particular, I think we need to get into a position where, as a committee, you routinely receive information about at your meetings about complaints that have been made, the numbers, the themes that are coming through. And then once a year, you receive that annual report then that draws everything together. So, Chairman, that's the report then. 2 main points: the adoption of the LGA model code is recommended to you, and then the adoption of new arrangements for assessing, investigating, and hearing complaints.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think that's a very detailed run through. I think all of us who sat on the various hearings considering various complaints, I think would welcome a consistent approach, particularly to the town and parish councils, so we're not having to study and cross-reference. You know, it just becomes a nightmare. So there's a lot of you know, common sense, I think, in that approach. We've got a number of requests to speak. So we start with Councillor Bill Pipe, please, and then Councillor Matt Hall.
Thank you, Chairman. Having been involved in the Local Government Association consultation, and also having been involved in councillor complaints for 10 years or more, I thoroughly commend the LGA Model Councillor Code of Conduct Committee as per the recommendations. I think it's a very good code of conduct. It closes a number of loopholes that perhaps were perceived in earlier versions of this, and I see no wrong in it at all. Fully support it. Thank you.
Councillor Matt Hall.
Thank you, Chairman. Jonathan, can you just answer one question first of all, which is in the recommendations, it says about an annual monitoring report being presented in May. Audit and Governance don't have a meeting in May. I'm just checking, does that mean that we would be presenting that to full council during its May meeting?
Chairman, I'll have a look at the dates. I think around that time of year is right to be able to report into the annual meeting if you wanted to from your own committee. But I'll go away and have a look at the precise dates. But I think something that runs as close to the council year as we can would be sensible.
Yeah, it's just we've got a meeting. I think it's the end of April-ish, and I think it's the beginning of July. And I would just also want to follow on from what Councillor Pipe was saying. I think that these are improvements, and I think that they will help us do our job. As I'm sure you know, Jonathan, between yourself and I think this issue of code of conduct takes up a huge amount of our time. So the more that we can do to dot the I's and cross the T's of some of the issues we found over the last year, I think all good for it. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that Councillor Bill Trite wants to speak, but personally, as chairman of this committee, normally I'm quite happy to propose recommendations 1, 2, 3, and the and. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll just hold that thought for a moment before we go to Councillor Bill Trite.
Thank you, Chairman. Could I just ask a small point at the very beginning, and ask Jonathan, excuse me, ask Jonathan whether the joint statement at the outset is part of the model code of conduct, or is it just by way of a sort of a rather indefinite introduction to it? Because it starts off, it says, as councillors, we represent local residents, we work to develop better services and to deliver local change. Now, I can thoroughly sign up to representing local residents and working to develop better services, but what happens if, say, for the sake of argument, perish the thought, but what happens if, say, an entire council were to be elected on a platform of no change? It seems to me that this is a kind of rather indefinite, nebulous policy directive even, and it seems to me somewhat inappropriate in this place, and I'd appreciate Jonathan's thoughts on that.
Interesting question. I see that as an introduction, not a specific requirement of the code as such. There are, when you go into it later, some very specific expectations of the sorts of behaviour expected of councillors, but I wouldn't quite use exactly those words around nebulous. But I think you are right, that is not part of the actual code and the requirements expected of councillors.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. I'm glad to hear you say that, because I personally don't think that should frankly be in there.
Jonathan will know that there was quite a reasonably long discussion about this at the Thorough Authority, and a number of Wiltshire members were concerned with the clause around bringing the council into disrepute. I think, reflecting on that, I think there is an issue where we perhaps need a bit of guidance. They give one example, but I think in order for to discuss those sort of things, there is the danger of that meaning a wide number of things to different people. I think perhaps we need to think about what that means. I don't think that's something that should stop us supporting this in any way, but I think it could be open to multiple interpretations. I don't know what you think about that, Jonathan.
Yeah, Chairman, I think what will sit around this as well is some guidance, and I'm working at the moment with Neil Wedge, Chief Executive of DAPT, Dorset Association of Parish and Town Councils, on training, which if Dorset Council adopts this code, and if as we hope then parish and town councils are consistent and largely adopt the same code, we will be rolling out some training to parish and town councillors, and some guidance will sit alongside that. The point that I didn't pick up, and apologies for this, I didn't pick up in the presentation, was just around the importance as well of local resolution. And there is a bit of a shift in these arrangements towards trying to secure resolution of complaints locally, and not almost as sort of parent and child. If we can't resolve things locally, we just automatically send them to Dorset Council to sort them out. And I think this code and the arrangements help us to get away from that.
Absolutely. I've got Councillor Bill Troy wishes to another question.
Yes, just a follow up to that, if I may. Jonathan, I know I've raised this with you in the past, but I think it's at a late stage, the items, well, best practice, that's it. In section 7, 8 and 9, there's reference yet again to the independent person. Now, I presume, as I think you've told me in the past, we are stuck with that name, independent person. I don't object to it per se, but I do object to it in the sense that what it implies as to other people, that they are not necessarily independent. And quite frankly, I believe councillors are entirely capable of being completely independent, whatever their political persuasion, when it comes to any particular issue. And so it concerns me that we have this independent person, apparently independent person, who is set up as somebody who should be referred to in defined areas, whereas I frankly do not agree with that term independent. The correct term would be disinterested, but of course people mistake that for uninterested. There is a difference. Could you just confirm again that we are indeed stuck with that term independent person, because it's the implications that it has for others that concern me?
Yes, Chairman, I can confirm that. So the language independent person is one of the requirements of the Localism Act. It's a specific term used in the Localism Act, and you are required to, as a council, to appoint one or more independent persons, and those independent persons are there to advise on code of conduct complaints, and in particular they're to be available before a complaint is heard, and they're to be available to a councillor who is the subject of complaint. And if an individual councillor is subject to a complaint, they can consult the independent person. I'm sorry, the language wasn't my choice, and it's simply a term that we're stuck with in the Localism Act.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. I thought so.
Okay, I think we've given this a good air. We've got 3 recommendations. Our chairman, Matt Hall, is proposed. Do we have a seconder, please? I propose to put them all on block unless there's a need.
Claire Sutton, happy to second, Richard.
Okay, so we've got Claire.
I did put that in the chat line earlier, Richard, but you obviously not seen.
Sorry, I missed that. Yeah, okay. Okay, in that case, that's all in favour, and we look forward to that process going through, and hope that the parish and town councils adopt that approach. We assume we can't make them do that. That's up to them, but hopefully we can strongly recommend that.
So,
Okay.
Chairman, just to confirm, that is those are recommendations onto full council now.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
So it needs to be supported by full council. Yes. Pointed out. Okay, we shall now move on to item 8, which is review of the council's borrowing. Assume that's over to Aidan again.
Yeah, David Wilkes, my colleague David Wilkes will do that.
Right.
Yep.
Thank you, Chairman. David Wilkes, Service Manager for Treasury and Investments. So this report, you might recall at your meeting in November, members asked if, when I presented the mid-year Treasury update, members asked if I could produce a separate report that dived into our borrowing in a bit more detail. So this is that report. Section 10 of the report, the introduction, summarises the reasons for borrowing and gives some background to borrowing. So as the report says, in summary, we can borrow money to fund capital expenditure or to cover temporary cash flow shortfalls. So our capital programme, any capital expenditure that is not financed from external sources such as government grants or from the council's own resources, so from revenue or from reserves or from capital receipts, leads to a borrowing requirement.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, I was just pausing. Yeah. So the unfinanced element of the capital programme is what leads to a borrowing requirement. Yeah. Debt. When we take out borrowing, this is only a temporary form of finance, as ultimately all capital expenditure has to be charged to the revenue account. So through the mechanism of minimum revenue provision is the normal route. So for example, if the capital programme includes the purchase of an asset for £10 million, which has got a estimated life of 10 years, then if there's no other funding source for that, then that would lead to a borrowing requirement, but there would be a charge to the revenue account each year of 10 million divided by 10, £1 million of minimum revenue provision, plus the cost of borrowing itself, so the interest on the borrowing. In terms of our borrowing activity, is conducted within the SIPFA's Prudential Code for Capital Finance and SIPFA's Treasury Management Code of Practice. And also, as you'll be aware, each year the council's required to agree, full council's required to agree a capital strategy and a treasury management strategy. So these would have formed part of the budget report that went to full council last week or the week before for the new financial year. One other thing I just wanted to, or a couple of things I wanted to try and tease out as part of the introduction is the fact that there's a difference between the borrowing requirement and our actual borrowing. So to give a bit of context, our borrowing requirement is approximately £300 million, and our actual borrowing is in the region of £200 million. The reason why, or how we can do this is through a mechanism that's known as internal borrowing, which effectively means when we've got usable reserves on the balance sheet, we've got two options in a way. We can invest those usable reserves, or we can use them to offset the borrowing requirement. So this is why there's a big difference, or big delta, if you like, between the borrowing requirement and the actual borrowing that we hold. One point that I didn't cover in the introduction, which I think might be useful to highlight, is that we as a council and the predecessor councils haven't financed individual capital projects. We look at it in the round, so we look at the whole of the capital programme. We look at all of the external funding and internal funding, which leaves the borrowing requirement for the capital programme as a whole. So we haven't previously gone out and financed individual assets. That is an option that you know remains on the table. That is something that we could do, but in practice, I think we would only ever consider that for exceptionally high level of capital programme. Sorry, a capital asset that had an exceptionally high level of cost. Moving on into section 11, I don't know if it's possible, Lillian, to forward through to the top of page 102, where there's a table that summarises our actual borrowing as at the end of January, which is unchanged as at today's date. So that is our current borrowing position. So this table summarises the borrowing in two ways in terms of the source of the borrowing. So PWLB, which is Public Works Liability or Public Works Loans Board, which is now part of the Debt Management Office, which is effectively central government. So effectively that's borrowing from central government in that first column. We can also borrow from other local authorities or indeed other public bodies, although currently we only have borrowing there from local authorities. We don't have any borrowing from any other public bodies. As you'd expect, we can also borrow from banks and other financial institutions, and we also have some lending from other bodies as well, which I'll talk about those a little bit later. And then down the side, we've also got a summary there of the type of borrowing that we have. So the simplest is the fixed term maturity. So we borrow £10 million for 10 years. We repay it all at the end of the life of the borrowing. Fixed term annuity, which is probably in our own sort of personal finances, is similar to a repayment mortgage. So we pay a fixed sum of money each payment period, so be it monthly, quarterly, 6 monthly or annually. But initially that starts off as a high percentage of interest and a small element of repayment of the principal that you've borrowed. And then as you move through the life of the asset, it flips around the other way. So later in the life of the borrowing, the majority of the money that you're paying over at each payment period is repaying down the maturity, the principal, and a smaller element is paying off the interest. Then we've got LOBOs, which is lender option borrower options. I'll talk about those. I'll come back to those and other borrowing. So if we can just go down again, sorry, to paragraphs 11.5 and 11.6. So lender option borrower options, or LOBOs. Obviously these are loans that have attracted a lot of publicity over the last 10 years or so. The term covers is a wide-ranging umbrella term. The loans that the council holds that are lender option borrower options are what's referred to as vanilla, i.e. they are the simple, most straightforward types of LOBO loans. So the lender's option is that at set periods through the life of the loan, they are able to change the interest rate. Now clearly they're only going to change that in one direction. They're not going to change it down there. So they have the option at designated times through the loan to say, actually, you've got this loan at 4%. We wish to increase that to 5%. Then we, as a borrower, have the option at that point to say, OK, we accept that, or no, we don't accept that. And at which point we have to repay the principal in full. We have, I think from the table, if I can just read my own table, we have 30.5 million pounds of loans. So out of the total of 210 that are LOBOs. As it says there, to date, no lenders have exercised their options on these loans, and the reasons for that, and that's similar to anyone else who holds these similar vanilla style LOBOs, that when the loans were taken out, prevailing long-term interest rates would have been in the region of 4 to 5%. Then now, and have been for the last 10 years, more in the region of 2 to 3%. So clearly, there's been no incentive for any of the lenders to call in to take the opportunity to take their option and come to us and ask us for, well, if they were to ask us for an increase, then we would be very happily take out a loan at a much lower rate and repay that principal. The other category there, which is a bit of a catch-all, other loan agreements, we have two loans, one for 20 million and one for 25 million pounds, which fall into this category, and they have some similarities with the LOBOs, but they are slightly different. So both of those loans are for a very long period of time, for approximately 50 years, each of those loans. After 25 years, or the lender can request us to repay the loan in full. They must give us 6 months notice of that. So in this arrangement, there is a lender's option, but there isn't a borrower's option. We would just then need to repay that loan at that period in time. And thereafter, if they don't call it in after 25 years, I think each of the loans is I think at five yearly intervals thereafter, they have the same option. If we move on to section 12, you'll be pleased to know I'm not intending to go through this in detail, but it's just to illustrate the point of this. And this is a table this is part of the parameters that are agreed every year as part of the Treasury Management Strategy. So the purpose of this is that we never have too much debt maturing at the same time, because if we needed to go out and refinance that debt at that particular time, we would be at the whims, if you like, of the market. So there may be an unfortunate interest rates may be particularly high at the time when we wish to refinance. So this is a way of spreading that risk, so that we ensure that we don't have too much maturing at any one time. These tables, as you can see, if you've got under 12 months and then 1 to 2 years, but then the gap's widening a little bit then into 5-year time periods. But underneath that, we would also endeavour to ensure that we don't have too much maturing in any 1 year, or indeed any 1 month underneath that. Moving on to section 13, this is about the early repayment of borrowing. So all of our agreements, or the majority of our agreements, do have clauses that allow us to repay the loan earlier. However, there are mechanisms to calculate a premium or a discount to compensate the lender or the borrower for the loss of interest over the remaining life of the loan. So in simplistic terms, if interest rates have gone down since the loan agreement was made, then it's likely to attract a premium, because if the repayment was made to the lender, they would not be able to go out to the market and get the same return as they can from the existing arrangement. And in the situation that clearly we haven't seen for the last 10 years, is if interest rates go up from the time when the agreement was made, then that would lead to a discount, because the lender could actually go out and invest that, lend that money to someone else and gain a much higher interest rate. Also, what impacts on the premium or discount is the length of time that's left to run on a borrowing. So very simplistically, if a loan only has a year left to run, there's not much loss that needs to be compensated to the borrower. It's only 1 year's loss. But if it's 25 years or more, then that it's clearly 25 years or more loss that needs to be recompensed. So again, in Appendix 1, there's full details of all of our borrowing, and it's got the best estimate that we have in terms of the premium. If you, yeah, we'll just stay there for now. Thank you. So for each loan where there's more than a year to run, we've got the best estimate that we have in terms of what that premium is likely to be. We were also, I think I was also asked at the last meeting to make some comments about any early repayment of borrowing that we had done since Dorset Council's been in existence. And under paragraph 13.4, you can see that actually two LOBO loans we had were repaid in the first month actually of Dorset Council coming into existence. And you can also see the size of the premium in terms of that loan there. And that did lead to a net revenue or an estimated net revenue saving, because firstly there is the interest that would have been paid on that £20 million is a saving, but then we also need to take into account either lost income from investing that money that was needed to repay that loan, or the new borrowing cost of covering the money to repay it. And also the premium of the 9.2 million gets charged to revenue across the life of the loan that's been terminated, if you like. And I forget the length of these two loans, but I think they were in excess of 25 years. So that means, if you like, that 9.2 million pounds gets spread across the charge to revenue gets spread across the life of the loans. Early repayment of borrowing is not something we do very often. It's in some, because of the mechanism for coming up with the premium, or the discount, it's there to ensure that nobody's really disadvantaged or advantaged by the early redemption of a loan. So therefore, if all we're going to do is replace that loan with going out to the market and borrowing for the same for the remaining life of that loan, then it really doesn't make much difference to the revenue position. So as long as there's still a requirement to borrow money to finance the capital programme, then the benefits, if you like, of early repayments are not really there. The only time early repayment is attractive really is if actually we're not seeing an increase in our underlying borrowing requirement. So trying to sort of simplify that, if the capital programme had was totally financed by revenue contributions from government grants, from other sources, capital receipts, etc., if we were seeing a reduction in our borrowing requirement year on year, then it would be something that we as officers would be actively pursuing, is looking at whether there were the opportunity for us to repay some of these long-standing borrowings that we have. But as you know, we are still, in terms of the capital programme that's been approved by council last week, we still have an element of unfinanced capital expenditure within that. So we're not in that position where it's something that we're actively looking at early repayment of borrowing. The two loans that were repaid were actually came from the lender. So they had their own reasons for wishing to take these two LOBOs off their balance sheet. So they came to the council through our Treasury advisors, seeking to presenting this opportunity to us. So those early repayments that we do make from time to time tend to be ones, given our current financing position, are ones that come from the borrower themselves. So if the borrower has their own reasons for wishing to take this off their balance sheet, then it can be advantageous for the council to take that opportunity.
Thank you.
So I think that's probably
okay
as much as I'd like to say, but happy to answer any questions.
Covered that in immense detail. I know it's a subject that is very dry, but it's a very large sums of money involved, and it's a concern, obviously, to this committee that it's being well managed, and it certainly appears to be. I've got a question from Councillor Mike Parks, please.
Thank you, Chairman. It's more of a comment, really. It was, if you remember, it was myself that did ask for this to come before this committee. First of all, I just wanted to thank David for such a comprehensive report into this. I feel, and I'm sure probably speak for other members, that I've got a really good understanding now of our borrowing, and I feel comfortable that the council's got a really good handle on this. So I just wanted to make a positive sort of comment on that, and thank you very much for that, David.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, you know, Appendix 1 just encapsulates it all very well, and that we can look at that, and some eye-watering loans that were taken out, perhaps under Dorset County Council, and the interest rates that obviously we can see where they were then and where they are now, and you know, but we are stuck with those going forward, and you've explained very well why there would be no benefit to paying those off early. But I think, like the insurance thing, you know, that we dealt with last time, I think that, you know, it's a really good area of the council that we need to get under the bonnet and have a look at. So I really appreciate that thorough report. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no other questions, we will move on to the forward plan. Take us forward to our work programme. Who wants to take us through that? I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Are there any items that
Chairman, it's Susan here. I don't have any updates for the committee on the forward plan today. Thank you.
Thank you. So looking forward, April, various money report. Yep. Yeah, so kind of full agendas coming up. Any comments from members? You satisfied with that, Matt?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Well, I do believe that concludes all the business. Just checking the agenda. Okay, so just bear with me.
That's okay, Chairman. We have no urgent items and we have no exempt business this morning. No.
Okay, well, in that case, that does conclude the business. I'm sure on our next return we'll have Matt hopefully have his building work complete, and he'll be back in the chair. But thank you very much for your attendance. Another very useful meeting and very informative. Thank you very much for everyone's input. Thank you very much.